Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for bearing with us with the technology changes. We had such a high demand, we had to try for new software, and so we're still trying to get a hang of it. But thank you so much for joining today's webinar, where we're going to discuss English language learners, and we have two guests with us today who will be talking about the rights of English language learners and then also how to communicate with school staff. So this webinar is brought to you by PREP, or the Parental Readiness and Empowerment Program, which is an initiative of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. The purpose of PREP is to improve student performance, reduce the racial achievement gap, and provide access to equal educational opportunities. And we do that by providing parent advocacy guides, advocacy workshops, educational consultation clinics, and webinars and video tutorials. We also work to ensure that parents have the tools necessary to effectively advocate for their children so that they have access to a quality education and greater educational opportunity. So my name is Natasha Quiroga, and I manage PREP, and I'm Senior Counsel in the Educational Opportunities Project at the Lawyers Committee. For over almost 15 years, I've worked closely with children and families on education issues, and I've also advised state departments of education on compliance with federal education laws. And today, we are joined by two fantastic presenters that we're very fortunate to work with. We have Nora Morales, who is Vice President and Senior Education Equity Advisor at MAEC, or the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center. And Nora is a former ELL student and immigrant and has over 20 years of experience as a teacher, staff developer, and parent coordinator. She's also the proud mother of a college and a high school student. And we will also be joined shortly by Marcelo Quiñones. Marcelo is an attorney in the Office for Civil Rights of the U.S. Department of Education, where he's responsible for the enforcement of federal civil rights statutes prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, gender, age, and disability. Previously, he practiced at two international law firms focused on government investigations and complex commercial litigation. And his pro bono practice has emphasized educational equity and civil rights, including the drafting of a guide on English learner rights for an educational legal clinic, and a case in which he represented Mexican-American students challenging Arizona's ethnic studies ban. Prior to becoming an attorney, Marcelo taught 5th grade in LA for 3 years as a Teach for America Corps member. So we've got some fantastic presenters today, and we really exciting to review some of this information. Some quick logistics. We're using this new technology, but we do have access to a chat box, which Nora is using right now. So if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat box, and our presenters will be able to respond, or we'll either type a response in the chat box, or else we'll respond to it orally. We also have a couple of polls that we'll be going through, so we're hopeful that you can participate on that end as well. So let's see. I think we are having some technical difficulties with Marcelo joining, who is at the Department of Ed. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for Marcelo to join, let's do a quick poll. So I'm going to pause my screen share for a little bit and do the poll. So we wanted to know who you are. If you can let us know if you are a parent, an educator, a school administrator, a community advocate, or another type of advocate, if you could just click your response here so that we have a better sense of who you are, as well as letting us know if you've ever had any interaction with the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education, also known as OCR. So the interaction might be you have actually yourself filed a complaint, you were part of an investigation as a school staff member, or you attended an OCR presentation. So we'll take some time for you guys to fill out the poll and let us know. Okay, we'll take a little bit more time and give some folks a chance to respond. So it looks like for the first question, we have the majority of folks are educators, which is great. And we have a few school administrators and community advocates and other. So if you selected other, if you can type in your chat box what other means, just to give us a better sense of who's joining us today. And then in terms of the second question, have you ever had any interaction with OCR? We have a few people who said no, yes, but the majority of you said no. So that's great. You'll be learning a lot more today from Marcelo, who is hopefully being able to log on from his office. And in the meantime, I'm going to end the poll now. But thank you so much for participating. We will have a couple of polls throughout the webinar so that you can share your thoughts with us. Okay, so let me see. I'll share the results so that you can see who's joining us today. And then I think we're going to have a slight change in plans, and I do apologize for the technical difficulties. I just got a text message from Marcelo, and he should be on in 10 minutes. So Nora, if we're able to have you join, and perhaps we can have you start your part of the presentation. There she is. Let's see, I think you might be muted, Nora. Okay. Oh, good, we have a researcher on. That's great. Nora, are you unmuted now? Let's see. I have to unmute her. Thank you guys all for bearing with us. I've got dealing with these technical difficulties. Okay, Nora, I think you're unmuted now. I found the button.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Okay. Woo! You know, technology is only as great as the people using it. So welcome, everyone. My name is Nora Morales, and I'm Vice President and Senior Education Equity Advisor for the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center. We are an education nonprofit that's been around for about 24 years, and this is our mission and our core values and our areas of work. Really, we are all about ensuring social justice and making sure that kids have access to an equitable education and excellent education. We're also the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center, and the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center serves the states that are up on your screen. We are one of 10 technical assistance centers throughout the country. So if you are not from the Mid-Atlantic region, you can look up your equity centers by going to ed.gov, and there is a technical center, equity center serving your region. And this is all that we provide. We provide all kinds of support to state departments of education and school districts and schools. Today we're gathered to talk about ELL families, but I want to take a step back to just recap why families are so important to this conversation. In 2010, Tony Brick and company did a study talking about what were the important levers for student achievement and increasing student achievement in underperforming schools. And the research was published in a book called Organizing Schools for Improvement. And what they found was after school leadership, the most important lever was really parent-community ties. And of the 200 schools that they studied, schools with strong parent-community ties were 4 times more likely to improve in reading and 10 times more likely to improve in math. So if we need some sort of research on why families are so important, this is one of the reasons. We also know through Henderson and Mapp that increasing family engagement makes for better grades for students who stay in school, who take more rigorous coursework, and who are going to go on to careers in college. So the question always has to be family engagement linked to learning. It is not enough to build community in our schools and create welcoming environments. We have to be intentional about why we're inviting families to come to schools. And so the U.S. Department of Education, with the help of Karen Mapp, developed a capacity building framework for family engagement. And they identified these 6 roles, the roles of supporters, encouragers, monitors, advocates, and decision makers in order to really inspire learning. And what we find is if we take a minute to think about our own experience, I want you to think about these 6 roles, and I want you to think about how it is that your school is systemically and comprehensively providing activities and opportunities for English language learner families to be able to take part in these 6 roles or to support these 6 roles. So I want you for a moment to reflect on your own school experience, reflect on maybe your family experience, and what is it that schools are currently doing to promote these 6 roles. So if you can type into your chat box what it is that your schools are doing to get at the role of supporter, encourager, monitor, advocate, decision maker, or collaborator. What are your schools doing to promote these 6 roles that impact parent learning? I would love to hear from you. And supporters is basically supporting education and having positive messages about schooling. Encouragers are supporting children to believe that they can do anything they set their mind to. Monitors is monitoring the homework and classroom work that goes on. Advocates, I think it's pretty clear. And decision makers is all the different ways that families have to make decisions on a daily basis about their children's education and how are they collaborators. And some schools look to PTAs or PTOs as collaborators, or maybe even classroom volunteers. But I'd like to hear from you all on how it is that you are promoting these 6 roles. So if you can type this into the chat box, I'd really appreciate it. So home visits, parent-teacher conferences, texting with parents. That's awesome. Parent Policy Council, transitions from work from Head Start to public schools, awesome. Bilingual outreach workers, yes. Excellent. So, so what I see is some of our more traditional ways of engaging families in education, and these are very important roles that we know we need to provide opportunities for. I'd also like to say, though, that there are other ways that we don't traditionally support family engagement that hopefully you'll learn about today, and we will be able to really embrace as a community of practitioners. Hold on a second, my slide won't move forward. Okay. All right. So one of the things that we need to consider about our ELL families and our ELL students is the cultural aspect. Where are families coming from, and what is their relationship to schooling, formal schooling been prior to arriving in the United States? And so here in a very general way, and please understand that there are exceptions to these generalities because people are multifaceted, and even within a single culture, there is a variance in opinions and approaches to schooling. So I don't want to offend anyone. I just want us to be able to have some shared understandings of some common across the board differences that families who are newly arrivals to the United States might be experiencing. So from home countries, regardless of where they are, some home countries, teachers are the experts and they're honored for their knowledge. Questioning school staff is seen as disrespectful. School and home are separate, so the school sends out the message, we will take care of the schooling, you take care of what happens at home, and the two shall never intersect. Learning is very school directed, and schools don't expect families to be involved in homework. So, honestly, in some situations, the last bullet, families are very relieved not to be involved in homework. And I think that is something we have to acknowledge, because part of our misunderstandings when we work with families who are not from this country is the divide between expectations and reality, right? And so that gap between cultural understanding sometimes leads to miscommunication, mistrust, and a lack of engagement. So in the U.S., we very much talk about affluent families and middle-class families having a sort of a shared knowledge to decoding schools. They are, so we know that teachers are experts in their field, but that respect must be earned. The dynamics, especially as schools become more and more segregated, the dynamics about schools and our trust in schools and our trust in professional educators has been from disenfranchised communities, wait and see attitude. Can we trust this teacher? Can we count on this teacher? Can we count on this principal? Can we count on this administrator? And so respect must be earned. And that actually has some implications about how we define family engagement in schools and how we relate to each other when we work together as true partners. So asking questions is seen as an indicator of care and interest. We want families to ask questions when they don't understand something. We want families to be able to communicate concern. We want families to help us serve their children better. Schools and a home are expected to work together for student success. This is an implicit and explicit expectation we have. We also feel, and because we know that we only have students a very small portion of their days, that we want learning to continue outside of the classroom and the schoolhouse. We want learning to take place everywhere. Schools expect families to be involved in homework, and monitoring and providing materials, and facilitating group projects. And by facilitating group projects, I mean that we want parents to drive children to places so that they can meet up to do group projects, or we want them to go buy the trifold and the materials, or we want them to have a printer and a computer. These are implicit biases that we have as educators and expectations we have of families that we need to unearth and we need to make explicit so that we can understand when miscommunication occurs. Okay. So for me, when I'm doing family engagement training, especially with professionals and administrators, but also with families, it's so important to start with the end in mind. And for many, many years, science has backed up child development research that help us identify key developmental milestones in the life of children. But we have not done, as a community of practice, such a good job in having identifiable and shared educational milestones across our practice. And so this idea of some families having, knowing because they've been through the school system or because they've gone to college, having some sort of background knowledge and experience to rely on, we have to be able to unpack that. We have to make those learnings available to everyone, regardless of whether they're newcomers or not. So in an effort to do that, we took here at the center, we took a look at the pre-K through 12th grade continuum, and we tried to develop just some key educational milestones that we want all families to be aware of, regardless of what schools they attend and what districts they're a part of, because we believe that the science backs us up as to why, if you're hitting these milestones, your child would be in the best possible position to achieve career and college readiness by the end of 12th grade. So I'm going to take a moment and ask that you please react to anything that I've said so far, just so that I have an understanding of how families do these educational milestones strike you as keys. We know that reading on grade level by 3rd grade is such an important skill, and it's backed by the science about dropout prevention and high school completion. We know that it being at least on grade 6 by 5th grade sets you up to being able to take algebra by 8th grade, and that we are able to tell families the importance of students participating in sports, clubs, community organizations. And we are in many districts across the country, we have requirements of students that by the time they graduate in 12th grade, they will have had to do anywhere between 45 and 75 hours of community service learning hours. And so that's where the service learning hours comes from. One of the questions was, where do these milestones come from? These milestones were developed here at MAC, and they come through a compilation of research from Annie Casey Foundation, from Grad Nation reports, and from other organizations that have done research on what gets kids ready for colleges and careers. Okay, so if these are the end goals, right, and this is what we have to help families understand, then where in our educational process do we fall in to be able to be change agents to help all students be able to reach these milestones. So that is a question for us to ask. One of the things that we like to address with family engagement is how do we get away from conflict and misunderstandings and really get to meaningful parental engagement. And I'm going to ask Natasha. She is going to be taking on a role in a poem that we are going to talk about today, because I think that as educators, and as family, school, and community advocates, we have a list of things that we do to be able to engage families. But the part that sometimes is left behind is that while we have the technical solutions, we don't have the adaptive heart of the issue. So we can prepare the flyer in multiple languages. We can create a welcoming environment by advertising the meeting in multiple varied mediums, and we can make sure that interpretation is there, but we somehow still are failing to engage families, especially English learner families. So I want us to go through this dialogue poem and be able to come to some and answer some of the questions. Okay, so Natasha, if you can take the teacher role, I'll take the parent role.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. I am Marta, mother of Carlos, Jose, Margarita, and of Ana in Honduras, daughter of Delia and Enrique, wife of Javier.
I am Ms. Stevens, daughter of James and Julia, a teacher like my mom. I've been teaching 3 years now. I am Carlos's teacher.
We work hard for our family, cleaning buildings, babysitting, and doing construction. We want our children to learn and have good jobs in this country. I wish I knew English better so I could help them.
These kids are a big part of my life. I work after school and spend time on weekends planning lessons. I want to learn Spanish. There are so many Latino children in my class.
Since Javier left for Honduras, Carlos has been very angry, causing problems, not helping me with his younger brother and sister. I just don't know what to do.
Carlos is having a lot of problems. He's fighting with the other students. His test scores in math and reading are below basic. I can't seem to reach him.
I got a note from the teacher but cannot get off work to meet her. I will go another day. I tell Carlos, Carlos, tell your teacher I will see her on my day off.
I sent a note to his parents, and then I tried calling them, but the phone was disconnected. They never showed up nor called. I wonder if these people really care about their kids.
I really
care about Carlos and
want him to do well in
life.
So hopefully this poem depicts a common occurrence that happens between our staff and our families. And now using the chat box, if you could please answer the first question. What were some of the misunderstandings that occurred in this poem?
And if you're chatting, if you could make sure to click on everyone so that everyone can see who's on the webinar can see your comments. Some of you are sending it to just me and Nora and Marcelo, but everyone would really appreciate seeing your comments. Thank you.
So if you could go ahead and tell us what some of the misunderstandings in this poem were about. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure why we're not getting responses, but I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the issues that were coming up in this poem. So this poem is trying to depict misunderstandings of time constraints, thank you, job pressures family was facing, misunderstanding due to lack of resources, a working phone, yes. So let's see, teachers unaware of home life of Carlos, making assumptions based on her own life. Mom can't communicate directly with teacher. Exactly. So how it is that families can work together to establish trust and relationship building with staff becomes absolutely important. Because from both the mother's perspective and the teacher's perspective, they are both in the right from their own point of view. The issue around language access, how do I communicate with my teacher when my teacher does not speak my language? The issue of using children as intermediaries for translation support. The issue of having family crisis and not being able to feel comfortable being able to share that with our school staff. So the how we build those things is really something that the center has been taking a look at. We, as part of our work, we have done parent leadership trainings with English language learners. And over the course of the last 9 years, we have trained over 2,000 families. And we've helped parents go from being at a understanding level of understanding and navigating the school system and what they need to ask in the role as parents of teachers, to having them become cultural brokers for the school and also for the other English language families. So when we ask them in our focus groups, what are the key issues that come up for you, or how is it that you have started evolving in your pathway to being parent leaders? All of the families said that their start was a one-on-one connection with a trusting adult, someone who had conveyed to them a true investment in their child, that was willing to know them and their children for who they were and not jump to conclusions about them, but asked questions to learn more about them and their families. So in order to become culturally proficient educators and to really establish a welcoming environment, we need to keep in mind that it all begins with trust. You cannot have academic learning or monitoring of schoolwork or even seeing the importance of communicating and staying communicated and linked with the school if you don't trust the people who are caring for your children. So one of the things that we really like to advocate to families is how to introduce themselves with teachers and letting them know that they care about their education. And also wanting to take the inverse, having school staff introduce themselves to children's families early on and letting them know that they want to be partners in their children's education. Also asking or providing information on how the child is doing in reading, ESOL, and math is very important. We often cover reading and math in parent-teacher conferences, but seldom cover our ESOL proficiency levels and what we can do. Asking questions when we as staff do not understand something, and encouraging questions from families is the first step to building cultural bridges. Families in many countries see questioning as disrespectful, and we need to demystify that and codify it for our schools so that families do feel empowered and comfortable asking questions. Stating what we ask families to always state what they need and to explain why, and not to placate, apologize, or be fearful when asking questions. And the inverse of this for school staff would be that we state to parents exactly what it is they can do and why it's important for them to do it, asking them in a manner that is respectful and honors their expertise as their children's first teacher. And that wraps up for me. I just wanted to put some nuggets out there in terms of what we know about English learner families and getting at the heart of cultural understandings and communications. And now I will turn it over to Natasha.
Oh, great. Thank you, Nora. That was really, really helpful and interesting. We're going to jump to Marcelo, who is now connected. He's going to review the rights of ELLs, and if you have questions, please don't hesitate to type it in the chat box. So let's see, let me unmute Marcelo. Okay, Marcelo, can we hear you?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great.
Can everyone hear me? Great. So apologies for the technical difficulties. I had a difficult time getting connected there. I'll do my best to cover as much of the information as possible in the short time. And I'm really excited to cover the information with you. Before we get started, just a brief word of caution in terms of the presentation. It's general information. Natasha, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. This is just general information, and it's not a recitation of the applicable law, and it's certainly not a determination on a specific case, which are generally fact-specific decisions that we make on a case-by-case basis. Next slide. A quick overview of the presentation. I'll talk very briefly about OCR, our mission and activities, and then really the heart of the presentation will focus on the joint guidance that was released with the Department of Justice and my office, the Office for Civil Rights, last January 2015. Okay, some common goals that we share. First off, I think we all would like to ensure, along with parents, that ELs are receiving a high quality education, that they are not facing discrimination or harassment in the schools, and lastly, that ELs are able to attend schools that are welcoming and inclusive environments where their home languages and cultural backgrounds are seen really as a benefit and not a deficit. Nora touched on this point during her presentation as well. Next slide. Okay. OCR's role and our mission is to ensure equal access and promote educational excellence through the vigorous enforcement of civil rights. We do this by handling complaint investigations, so any member of the public that feels like they've been discriminated against can file a complaint with our office. We also initiate our own reviews where we feel like discrimination may be particularly acute or widespread, and we also issue policy guidance. Next. As I mentioned, really the heart of the presentation here today will be the January 2015 guidance. I would encourage you to review the fact sheets to the extent that there's a particular area that you have more questions on. You can refer to the Dear Colleague letter, which goes more in depth and has examples where we and the Department of Justice have found compliance issues in the past. Next slide. Okay, and you can find these resources at the website that's listed there. You can also Google, if you Google Office for Civil Rights and ELL resources, this page will usually come up as the first search entry there, and you can navigate to this page. This page contains the fact sheets, the Dear Colleague letter, It also contains the toolkit, which is another helpful resource for districts and for parents to understand how these obligations are carried out in practice in schools. Next slide. As I mentioned, the January 2015 guidance will be the focus of the presentation. The basis for the guidance would be Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is enforced by the Office for Civil Rights, as well as the Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice. And the Civil Rights Division of DOJ also enforces the Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974. Basically, under these two statutes, districts must take affirmative steps to ensure that ELs are able to participate meaningfully and equally in the educational programs of schools. Just a brief overview of the guidance. We will focus primarily on the 10 most frequent civil rights issues that arise in the context of EL students. The guidance also has these additional foci, and if you're interested in any one of those areas, please refer to the guidance. Next slide. Okay, just a quick word on applicability. The guidance applies to any state educational agency or local educational agency, and that includes public school districts, public charter schools, and public alternative schools as well. Next slide. We touched upon the legal basis for the guidance briefly. Title VI. Title VI prohibits national origin discrimination, and requires SEAs and schools to take affirmative steps to ensure that ELs can participate meaningfully in the educational program. As I mentioned, EEOA is enforced by the Civil Rights Division, and we want to focus on that as much throughout the presentation. Next slide. Okay, in terms of the case law, there are two key cases that are looked to in this area. The first is the Supreme Court case, Lau v. Nichols. And basically, in this Supreme Court case, the court recognized the fact that you cannot, sit students who are learning English in a classroom and provide them with the same teachers, textbooks, and lessons that you provide to other students. School districts and schools must do more. They must take affirmative steps to give students access to a meaningful education. Next slide. Okay, Castañeda is another case that's important in this area, but I will not spend very much time on it. Important for our purposes today is to understand that school districts have some freedom in selecting the EL programs they'll utilize, but so long as those programs are sound in theory and effective in practice. Next slide. Okay, and this is really the focus of today's presentation. I wanted to, and I apologize for going through the previous slides so quickly, but I wanted to spend most of our time today on some of the 10 common issues that arise in this area. If folks have had experiences with these issues or are particularly interested in any of these issues, if you would share out in the chat so that I can spend some more time. And here we have the poll that's showing up, so if you could let us know if any one of these areas is of particular interest that could help me in focusing on my presentation. Okay, I think we'll end the polling now. Thank you to everyone who participated. So we have a fairly even split. What I'm seeing is, I think we'll touch upon identification and assessment, spend some time on meaningful access and evaluating students for special ed, and then we'll close out with meaningful communication to parents. Okay. Identification and assessment is, of course, a really important first step in providing EL services. Typically, this is a two-step process. So first, the districts must engage in a process to identify students who may have a primary home language other than English. Most districts do this by asking parents to complete a home language survey that generally asks about the first language learned, language in the home, and the language that's most often used. Once a district identifies students who are potential EL students, they are to assess that student in English language proficiency as a second step, and a district must do so by testing in each of the 4 domains, and those are speaking, listening, reading, and writing. This process, the timeline for completing this process is 30 days from the beginning of the school year. So the district has 30 days to notify parents of those services that their child will be receiving. One note on this, and one example where we've seen issues that come up, is when districts have a method of identifying ELs that will leave a substantial portion of that population unidentified. So one example would be if you had a home language survey that only asked what was the first language that the student learned, that could leave a high number of ELs out of the program if they are primarily speaking that language in the home, for example. So that's one example of a compliance issue. Next. Okay, so we'll jump to providing meaningful access to the core curriculum, D. So this, and I'm glad this was one of the areas that polled the highest. This is really an area that's emphasized throughout the Dear Colleague letter, and that's that not only do school districts have the obligation to provide English language services so that those EL students are catching up in terms of English language proficiency, but there's also this, it's a dual obligation. So that's one half of the obligation. The second half is that they also have to provide access to grade level curricula so that they can meet promotion and graduation requirements. So ELs should have access to math, science, social studies, all of the other curricula that other students have access to. There are 2 ways in which districts can meet this obligation. So first, one way would be if a district was to emphasize language acquisition initially throughout that time period, but we would expect that a district would monitor the progress of EL students in other areas like science and math. And then after that period of emphasis is over, the district should come back and fill in any gaps that occurred because of the emphasis on language. Second, the districts could provide up front, they could provide access to those programs, and they could do so in a meaningful way by providing language assistance strategies so that the students can engage in those different subjects like math and science in a meaningful way. One example of this would be, with math problems, to provide, some problems in the home language along with the problems, math problems in English, for example. Next. We'll touch very briefly on this issue, and it's one that's been covered a lot lately, and that's access to other programs. ELs should have an equal opportunity to participate in other programs like pre-K, magnet programs, charters, advanced placement, and gifted and talented programs. And those last couple have really been covered a lot lately, and I wanted to give a couple of examples of ways in which, or considerations that the district should take into account when thinking about their method of evaluating gifted students. So, for example, For a course in mathematics, it could be that for an advanced placement course in math or calculus, for example, it could be that there's a grade level requirement that's keeping EL students that may not be meeting that requirement. For example, students are required to get a B, and EL students, have below a B in English. The district needs to assess whether that's a requirement that's essential to requirements that are essential to actually achieving within the advanced placement program. A second example would be whether there are modifications to assessment. So if it's advanced placement calculus or if it's a gifted exam for math, whether they could provide that in the student's primary language, that would be another consideration. Okay, next, I believe would be evaluating EL students for special education and providing dual services. This is another area that we often get asked about when we're out on the road. The first and the sort of the baseline issue that we see in this area is that some districts still have a no dual services policy. What that means is that some districts may basically say that because a student, an EL student, is receiving language assistance services, they do not qualify for disability related service, or the inverse of that. They may say that a student that is receiving disability-related services under Section 504 or IDEA is not eligible for language assistance services, and that is not the case. EL students must be located, identified, and evaluated for special education services in a timely manner, just like any other students. One issue that arises as well in this context is in the process of evaluating those students, the IEP team should take into account any language issues that the student has, any deficits in English language proficiency, so that students are not being identified for special education services on the basis of their English language proficiency. Next. One quick point on this slide is that another issue that can arise is when districts or schools are indicating that they are holding off on evaluation. So when we say that students, EL students, like all other students, should be identified and evaluated in a timely manner, that means that it's not wouldn't be okay for a district to have a policy that they're going to wait for a specified period of time to determine whether it's the English language proficiency that's causing issues rather than disability-related needs. And so that's another point on this topic. Next. Okay. I think we were going to jump to ensuring meaningful communication with LEP parents. Okay, perfect. So LEP parents are entitled to meaningful communication with the school in a language that they can understand. They also should have adequate notice of information about any programs, services, or activities that are called to the attention of non-limited English proficient parents. Issues that we see arise in this context, the first one that comes to mind that we hear about quite often is in the context of IEP meetings. The district should have trained interpreters. The district or school should not be using, untrained staff or students or family members to interpret at meetings or at any parent conferences or other meetings of that sort. Another issue that comes up and is specific to IEPs is that some districts, and we're still encountering issues with this, is that providing the interpretation at the IEP meeting from a trained interpreter is one of the obligations that relates to those meetings. But just like other parents, LEP parents are entitled to have the IEP translated into a language that they can understand. And sometimes those that determination can be fact-specific, but generally that is the case. One final piece on ensuring meaningful communication with LEP parents that I'll say, and you know, it's up front in the process. We talked about with identification of EL students, the home language survey, and that's one method by which districts and schools can also keep track of their limited English proficient parents. The school district should have a policy and processes so that they can keep track of these parents and know, you know, what parents require translation and in what languages. You know, we've seen instances where school districts will either, you know, tell us or will rely on last names or other bases rather than actually getting the necessary information in terms of the language background of the parents to both assess and track what parents need. Okay, and I do want to cover briefly, I mentioned the 2 fact sheets. I would encourage everyone to access these fact sheets. They're available in 11 languages, and they provide, I think, a really helpful overview of the guidance and also cover a couple of the key points that are related in that guidance, related to guidance. Okay. And I also mentioned the English Learner Toolkit. This is another great resource for districts and also for parents to be aware of the processes and some of the ways in which districts can meet their obligations to English learners. Lastly, options for involving OCR. If you feel like you've been discriminated against on any of the bases that we talked about earlier, if you feel like an English, you know, English learner programs and services are not meeting these obligations that we discussed, you may file a complaint with OCR. We don't have a set timeline for completion of our investigations, but we generally try to complete investigations within 180 days. Another way, you know, if you have questions about particular issues that have come up or your experiences with the EL program or any other discrimination-related issues, you can contact our office at ed.gov, or you can also call the number, or you can contact me directly as well. Okay, questions?
So Marcelo, we do have a couple of questions asking about what you do when it's in an obscure language and that language is not offered by the interpreter services program that you utilize, which is the only program in town.
Okay, I'm trying to quickly look. In terms of that question, I would say we do run into issues with their parents that speak, you know, non-dominant languages. So if there's a high prevalence of specific language, I'll use Spanish as an example, and their students, parents that speak other languages, the same types of obligations still apply when it's a non-dominant language. We would expect that interpretation would be available to those parents as well. In terms of translation, it could be that you know, there may be more of a process in terms of having a trained translator there, and it may depend on the document and the amount of time that it takes to provide the document. There may be a bit more leeway in that respect. And I also saw another question here about a child being evaluated. That is, so I am, sorry, I was taking a moment to review the question. It says, my problem is when a child is evaluated at a kindergarten is not needing EL services, but as they progress through school, their parents can't help them learn English, and so they fall further behind. They don't learn the vocabulary or grammar and can't practice decoding skills. That's a clear issue. You know, that's actually an issue that I encountered personally growing up. But I would say that in that sense, I think that the obligations of the district would be to undergo that identification process now. In that scenario that you described, it's possible to, you know, have that child call for an assessment again. Perhaps would be that parents to try to have that sort of some of those conversations that Nora was covering in her PowerPoint to bring that to the attention of the teacher and the administration. You know, because the obligation, if there was an identification process that was proper and there was an assessment and that did not reflect that the student was to receive EL services, school, you know, at that point has met their obligation. Now, if it's called to their attention again that the child may need EL services, you know, it would seem that they should perhaps test again. But that's a question, pretty fact-specific question that you can follow up with me about offline.
Okay, and there was a follow-up to the language question and where there was not a lot of services. Would it be okay to use a family friend when there's no one available in your locality?
So in the situation where there's a family friend that's brought in to interpret, excuse me, in that situation, we would expect that at a minimum, the district would inform the family of their right to have a trained interpreter present. And if it's the family's desire and their choice to have someone else translate, then that would be looked at differently than if, you know, this district or school said to the family that they did not have an interpreter available and, you know, either asked them to bring in a family member to interpret or did not, you know, inform them of their right to have a trained interpreter present when they did bring in a family member. Okay.
Okay, let's see. Someone did ask about Arizona. I believe Nora is responding. Did you have anything to share or add, Marcelo?
I would just echo Nora's response. Arizona has to comply with these obligations. Both the state and actually this brings up a good point. The state educational agency of it, you know, has an obligation to monitor and oversee the EL services that are provided in the state, as well as, you know, the individual districts have these same responsibilities that I've talked about throughout the presentation.
Okay, great. If there are no other questions, I did want to add on, let's see if I can go back to my screen. I did want to add on that the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center and PrEP, we've developed a guide for parents of English learners to advocate for their children, and it's a very useful tool as well for educators and administrators. And we go through a number of different topics related to ELLs, including student and parent rights, and parent engagement, interpretation and translation, as well as special education and intersection with ELLs. So if you have questions about that, you can contact me Our email address is prep@lawyerscommittee.org. We are also going to be releasing video tutorials on the topics in the guide this coming May and June. So you can stay tuned to our website at prepparents.org, and you can join our listserv so you can receive more information. But this guide includes a lot of different activities that are useful for parents to review their rights and get a little bit more access to everything. But I want to thank everyone for your patience today and the technical issues, and a big thank you to Nora and Marcelo for this really helpful information. We do have a survey for, if you can please fill it out. Let's see. Here is the link. I will try and copy the link into the comments box. And then if you can please let us know also if you have any additional future topics that you would like us to cover, and we can see what we can do. But we will be sending out a link to the recording of this webinar as well as the materials. So thank you so much for joining us today. We will be providing the handouts, and I'll leave you with this link, and thanks for bearing with us in the tech issues. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.